So, in some ways, the two conventions were quite similar. For one thing, they both featured this sort of weird merging of politics and pop culture. The Republican convention featured Kid Rock and Hulk Hogan. The Democratic convention featured a dance party during the state roll call. And I have mixed feelings about that. I'm not sure whether it's good to mix pop culture and politics in the way the parties are doing. But regardless, I also think that both conventions clearly made an effort to appeal beyond each of the party's traditional bases. So the Republican convention very clearly, via its speakers, made a concerted effort to reach out to African American voters. The Democratic convention, particularly during the night when Governor Walz spoke, made an effort to reach out to rural voters, and rural voters are disproportionately Republican. So in this way, both the parties and their conventions made an effort to reach out beyond the traditional groups that vote for them. But there are also very clear differences between both conventions. The Democratic convention was much more optimistic, much more joyful, to use the word that Governor Walz and Vice President Harris are really promoting right now. The Republican convention was much more dire, and that's for obvious reasons. Republicans want to present a negative view of the state of the country. And it's in the incentive of the Democrats to promote a positive, optimistic view of the country. I think it's fair to say that we're going to see a lot of twists and turns. We already have, right? I mean, generally speaking, by this point in a presidential campaign, things are just gearing up. But we've already had so many head-spinning developments thus far, and I'm expecting more of those. If for no other reason than it's in the media's interest to kind of gin things up and make things exciting to keep ratings up. And so, right now it's clear that the Harris campaign and the Democrats have the momentum, but I don't anticipate that that's going to continue to be the case. At some point, momentum is going to shift back to Trump. I think the debate that's coming up on September 10th is going to be very important. And I guess the one prediction I would make, I hesitate to make predictions these days, but the one prediction I would make is that this election is going to be close, and that the state of the race in October is going to be quite different from what the state is now. I think it's fair to say that Trump is going to go after Harris, although he's going to have to be careful. It's a challenge for a candidate like Trump to go after a female candidate and a black woman candidate at that without raising his negatives. Harris obviously is going to want to remind voters of all of the aspects of Donald Trump that they don't like, and is going to try to remind voters of the chaos of the Trump presidency and instill in them the idea that a return of Trump to the White House will mean a return of that sort of chaos. But she's going to have to be careful as well, right? Because she and her campaign have been trying to create an atmosphere of positivity and optimism in their campaign, and if she goes too far in the negative direction, then that's going to undermine that message, and that could be to Trump's benefit. I'm expecting that voter turnout is going to be very high, at least compared to the elections of the past, right? We've seen this increase in turnout in American elections in the past 20 years. And the 2020 presidential race resulted in the highest turnout rate as a percentage of eligible voters in over a century. And given the fact that both parties, their bases are very enthused, and also that both parties, their bases view the candidate of the other party with a high degree of trepidation, I'm assuming that the bases are going to turn out to vote at very high rates. And so turnout in 2020 was about 67% of the eligible population. I'm anticipating that we're going to get even higher than that this year, perhaps close to 70%, which would be an all-time record, at least going back to the early 20th century. But on the other hand, it's important to bear in mind that even if we reach that level of turnout, that still means 30% of Americans aren't turning out to vote, which puts us at the lower end of advanced democracies. And so even if we do better this year, we still have a long way to go. I think this race is certainly historical in the sense that we have a former president running to reclaim his office. We only have had that, I think, twice before in American history. And of course, this former president has in the interim been convicted of crimes and is slated to go on trial for other crimes. So that's certainly a unique situation. On the other side, we have a vice presidential candidate who is serving under a president who has very low approval ratings and who's had a bit of a rough go of it herself as vice president. But since she sort of broke out on her own, she's generated a lot more positive coverage. So these are very distinctive dynamics. I think in the grand scheme of things, though, like in terms of voting patterns and so forth, this election is actually not that unusual. You know, we have over the past 25, 30 years in America been in sort of an extended period of frozen political alignments. Our presidential elections are routinely very close. 90 to 95% of the people vote the same way from election to election. I always say that the 2016 presidential election, when Trump beat Hillary Clinton, the most interesting thing to me about it was that despite how unusual both of the candidates were, 90% of Americans voted the same way in 2016 as they did in 2012, right? And the difference in the outcomes between those two elections had everything to do with very small shifts among a small number of voters in a small number of states. And my anticipation is that this election is going to shape out the same way. It's going to be very close. Most people are going to support the parties they've supported in the past. And it's going to be a very, very small percentage of voters that are going to make the difference.